During the Battle of Shrewsbury in July 1403, Prince Henry, leading his father Henry IV's army, came within an inch of death. While briefly taking his helmet off, an arrow struck Henry directly in the face. The shaft struck the 16-year-old on the left side of his nose, burrowing 6 inches into his skull. In an instant, the king in waiting fell to his knees, screaming in agony. Incredibly though, Henry somehow found the strength to finish the battle, rousing his wide-eyed troops as the king's army fought their way to victory. Now the conflict was won. The attention turned to Henry's awful ailment. How could the Prince of Wales survive with an arrow lodged 6 inches into his skull? When King Henry IV was crowned King of England after deposing King Richard II in 1399, he had the support of the Earl of Northumberland, Henry Percy. However, relations quickly turned sour after the king failed to pay the Percys adequately for defending the Scottish border. Any feeling of goodwill then completely eviscerated when Henry IV refused to ransom Henry Percy's brother-in-law, Sir Edmund Mortimer, who was captured by the Welsh in 1402. The growing hostilities between the powerful Percy family and the king eventually culminated in the Battle of Shrewsbury in July 1403. About 2 hours before dusk, King Henry IV raised his sword. The battle opened with a massive archery barrage. As thousands of arrows rained down, swathes of soldiers were killed before they could meet hand to hand in the field. One of the soldiers found on the field was the king's son, Prince Henry. Despite being just 16 years old, Henry was in charge with leading his father's army. Around midway through the battle, the teenager removed his helmet, assessing the scene around him. Then, within an instant, an arrow struck the prince on the left side of his nose, with the arrow burrowing 6 inches into his skull. Rocked by pain, Henry fell to his knees. Shockingly though, with adrenaline coursing through his body, the young warrior somehow managed to fight on for another 30 minutes. Following the death of Henry Hotspur Percy, the Battle of Shrewsbury was decided. The king's forces were victorious. Now the attention turned to treating the stricken prince. Others had tried to pull the arrow out, but while the shaft did come free, the arrowhead remained buried under the skin. Various medical experts had tried to remove the arrowhead with potions and other cures, but no one had any success. Finally, John Bradmore, a medical surgeon and metal worker, arrived on the scene and examined the wound. Before the Battle of Shrewsbury, Bradmore had been imprisoned on suspicion of using his metalworking skills for illegal purposes, namely counterfeiting coins. But following Prince Henry's injury, Bradmore was released in order to aid him. Bradmore first enlarged the wound enough to remove the arrowhead. He used a tent, a small thin piece of linen saturated in rosewater infused honey, to keep the wound open, allowing him to remove the arrowhead. Over the next few days he made the tents larger and longer. After Bradmore was certain the tents had reached the arrowhead, he then prepared the extraction of the arrowhead. Using tongs, a device with a screw-like mechanism inside, he worked down the shaft before gripping the arrowhead and delicately pulling it out of Henry's stricken skull. The next part of the treatment involved healing and closing the wound. The doctor cleansed the wound with white wine and then placed it on an ointment made of barley flour, honey and turpentine. Bradmore also noted that he was particularly worried that the young prince might suffer from seizures and that he would put ointments on his neck to soothe his muscles. For the next 20 days this process was repeated, allowing the wound to heal naturally and eventually close. Bradmore completes his account by stating, "Thus, thanks be to God, he was perfectly cured." Though it take Henry more than a year to recover, the prince had dodged death thanks to the ingenious work of Bradmore. Unsurprisingly, the surgeon's star was in the ascendant. He was paid 40 shillings for medicines provided to the king's household in 1403, and granted an annuity of 10 marks for his successful treatment of the prince. Years after his stardom, Bradmore was called upon to treat William Winklow, the king's pavilioner, whose suicide attempt left him with a wound to his stomach. After treating his patient for 80 days, Bradmore successfully saved yet another man's life. Bradmore passed away in 1412. Just 1 year later, Henry was crowned as Henry V of England. He'd go on to gain considerable land in France during the 100 Years' War, with his greatest achievement coming with the victory at the Battle of Agincourt in 1415. By the time of his death in 1422, Henry V had forged a reputation as England's greatest warrior king and one of the country's most inspiring monarchs. And to think, had John Bradmore not have performed his groundbreaking surgery, King Henry would never have made it past the Battle of Shrewsbury, never mind Agincourt.